Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Series Strategy Game and we're returning to our tutorial series for Rule of the Waves 2, where this time we want to focus on the campaign aspects of the game. So we're going to start a new game over here and talk a little bit about the campaign interface and what it's all about. So Rule of the Waves 2 at its core is a game where you are trying to steer the navy of a particular country through the ages. We're going to start out here with a 1900 start. You could also pick a 1920 start, and you can pick your nations. We're going to pick France because why not? There's a couple of important information here, basically the bonus tax, some aspects of the budget, some aspects of the other things, but yeah, and you can see the opposing nations. They do of course change over here, so for example if you're picking France, Germany will be one of your opposing nations, and so on and so forth. So we're going to set France, we're going to start out with an OK over here. First thing is we do need to select a save slot. You can change your name, you can change the fleet size. That would basically mean very large means you have a lot of resources, you can build a lot of ships, so can your enemies, but it's getting a little bit harder to manage, so initially I would suggest picking small or medium. You can play with historical resources, which means the UK gets a lot of resources, whereas most other nations don't. You can decrease or increase the research rate. I think 100% is perfectly fine. Varied technologies means that technologies have a different effect from what they had historically, so you can play with less hindsight, you can play with the AI advantage, slow aircraft development, or manual building of legacy fleet as we did last time. This time we're just going to go ahead and let the AI design the Navy for us. That's going to take a second over here, and then the AI is giving us a very weird fleet, I have to say, over here. So this is the main campaign screen, and it has 3 to 4 elements. The first is an overview of your current ships. The second is an overview of your budget. The third one is sort of a interface where you can steer a couple of other things. And the fourth is the diplomacy situation up over here. Let's start out with the ship overview. The ship overview is basically a list of all your ships sorted by currently type, so battleships, heavy cruisers, cruiser armored I think is the abbreviation, destroyers with their current name, their classes, so basically how many these ships here all belong to the same class, which is an ocean class ship, including the lead ship of their class. They all have a displacement of 15,000 tons, so that's basically the nominal weight of this ship. They have a speed of 19 tons. They don't have any radar equipment because it's 1900. They're not very good at anti-submarine warfare duties. Destroyers are a little bit better at that. They've all been built in the year 1899 because this is the legacy fleet. As you build new ships, they do get a new year. This is helpful to know. There's the current location, the current status, we're going to talk about this in a second, crew quality, and maintenance, so how much you are paying for this. You can also see a brief description of the ship, which means this ship here has 4 12-inch guns, 16 6-inch guns, and 2 torpedo tubes. Whereas, for example, this ship here has only 2 8-inch guns, 8 7-inch guns, and 2 torpedo tubes, and so on and so forth. The most important thing about this is that you can do a right click on it and set different things. So for example, you can set active fleet, which is this current status, reserve fleet, or mothballed. Reserve and mothballed are basically a state of lower readiness, but where you pay less maintenance. So for example, putting this ship here on reserve fleet means basically the maintenance is halved, whereas if you put it on mothballed, we can't do this because it's not in our home region, but if we do put this on mothballed, it's further reduced. However, the crew quality will go down over time, so this should only really be done in peace times. Only active fleet status means that you can participate in wars and so on and so forth. You also have further statuses. Trade protection is during wartime. You want to send out ships to protect your trade from enemy submarines, from enemy raiders, and so on. So that is basically a home water trade protection, not your main fleet, but they will be trying to protect your shipping. You can also send ships to foreign station, which means they are going to your various colonies, and they are there to fulfill the tonnage on foreign station requirement, which currently is fulfilled because a couple of our ships are in Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean, and so on and so forth. But if you want to do that automatically, you could say pull this guy here to foreign station, and he will travel around and be on foreign station, and that will be pretty nice. So as long as this here is fulfilled, you don't need to worry too much about that, but you can design ships specifically for that by clicking this colonial service. So that's adding, I think, about 60 or so tons, which is not much, but can be extremely helpful. Right, there are other aspects over here. You can designate ships as raiders, so they will do commercial raiding. They will try to interrupt enemy commercial shipping, and you probably want some ship with long range and so on. You can also move ships, and that brings up a new dialogue over here where you can pick the ship and you can select a destination where it's moving. So for example, currently the ships in Southeast Asia, we've selected the Montcalm, a Guderian class heavy cruiser, and we can send it, let's say, towards the Caribbean. And you can acknowledge this, and then he's trying to go to the Caribbean. However, it says he wants to go through the Indian Ocean first. And that is because over here you have the map, and if you look at, I think it was Southeast Asia, and we do want to go to the Caribbean, you have to pass through various regions first, as denoted by these little blue connections here. That is how a ship can travel, and it will basically go down one area per month. One turn is 1 month, so it will probably take about 4 months or so to get to the Caribbean. Notice that when we did bring up the move dialog over here, there was also another ship over here, the Montcalm itself. You could bring this over, for example, and get 2 of these in to move. You can also pick different ships, like with just clicking them, control clicking them adds another one to that, shift clicking adds all the ones in between. So you can select various ships and move them all around as long as they are in the same area. If they're not in the same area, so for example if we select these 2 ships and then we decide to move them, you can only pick one of them. I think the one that's in the top of the list. List is also sortable by all of these categories. Mostly I would suggest using displacement, because that means your bigger ships are on the top over here, and that's a nice indication to me at least. Right. You can also, these here are not quite as important, you can sell a ship for scrap, but most importantly you can open the design for rebuild, so that would allow you to change a couple of things on the ship. Some things are a little bit more expensive to change, for example the machinery, you can't change the armor, but you can change the guns and so on, and that might sometimes be useful. Specifically fire control is something that every now and then you might want to update as you get new technology. In addition to that, you can also rebuild ships. So once you have opened a design, you must, let's say we were to change the gun caliber over here, we could change this design. It's slightly overweight, but it's seriously overweight, so we can't actually do this. But let's say we were to add some, or we reduce the rounds per gun. Just a nominal change over here. That is legal. It's probably not a very good thing, but then you can rebuild them. You can also go ahead and rebuild further ships of their class to that designation, and that should be fine and dandy. That brings us to this third tab over here, which is the ships under construction, where you can see that currently 2 of our ships are being rebuilt. You can also see that we are currently building 2 more ships, the Friedland and the Magenta, and these are ships that we are not rebuilding, but we are building them from ground up. And most of this is, as you would see on the ships in service overview. The most important change is the months left, that is the months left in construction. So rebuilding these destroyers currently takes 12 months, building a new ship takes 15 months, and the cost per month, so it only costs $5 or 5 generic units of money per month to rebuild these guys, but it nearly costs 2,000 per ship that we are building. You can also double click on each of these ships to bring up this dialog, which simply shows you the ship itself and gives you some information, most importantly the armor. It shows you the gun layout. There's also an overview over here. This is a very typical French battleship from before the Dreadnought area. So you have 2 turrets of 2 guns each in the front and the back, so 4 12-inch guns, and then a lot of 6-inch guns in the turrets on the wing, some torpedo tubes, the fire control that is useful once you want to upgrade that, and that is just the general information that you have up there. So let us move over to the Diplomacy tab. So over here you can see an overview of all of your enemies with a little bar sign. This bar is the tension level. So green means you're basically fine, you're basically buddies, it's nothing bad is happening. This darker green means with the US it's already, the tensions are a little bit higher. They're at level 4 over here, they're at 3, here probably at 2. So everything is fine and it's not really high tension at the moment. But if tensions were to go above this bar, you are ending up at war, and there's a tendency for them to accelerate. So once tensions are already high, they can break through here pretty quickly, so you need to definitively keep an eye on this. Sometimes they fluctuate on their own, there is a little bit of randomness in this, but they also fluctuate due to the event choices that you will be making and due to the intel effort that you're putting in. So you can spend some intel effort, so between 0, none, low, medium, high, on each of these nations, and the higher you put this, the more likely it is that you are going to end up with tensions increasing. Now, of course, intelligence does cost some money, but it's typically very, very little. So this should not influence your budget too much, but it will influence how much intel reports you get. Of course, for now we don't have any because we haven't even played the first round. But it also gives you information on the Almanac. The Almanac does bring up this new window over here, which tells you about their budget, the battleships they currently have, the battleships that they are building, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and so on and so forth. And this does give you a very good overview about the enemy situation. So, for example, you can see Germany has a little bit more budget than we have. They have more battleships and more tonnage of battleships. They are building only one. And overall, once our 2 current ones that we are building are finished, we might even end up at higher tonnage than them. We have more heavy cruisers, but they are building more. We do have way fewer destroyers than they have. We can also see a detailed overview of them once we click on that, and you can see the national data, including their research. We can also see the ships that they have with some information. We don't know everything about them, but you can double click on them and get a fairly good overview. There's less information displayed over here because we don't know it. Of course, they also have some further armor except the belt armor. Right, we also see their sunk ships. That's not really important. On their build ships, there's not much information yet. For now, I'm going to increase all of this here to a little bit more. Typically, I keep it on high for nations that I want to attack in the short term, but for now, that should be okay. Other than that, there's only one big piece of the interface that we should look at on the map, which we've seen already. So the normal map overview is you can drag it while clicking right click, and you can see the connections between the different sea zones. You should also be aware where your home sea zone is. For France, that's Northern Europe. So in Northern Europe is your home base, and you can get blockaded if you have too many enemy ships over here. They will blockade you, and then things are going to start to hurt for you. You can also see that the Baltic states, Western Russia, for example, Finland, all of these currently belong to to Russia, sorry. We do have various other jurisdictions, other colonies in the world, in the South Pacific. We've got French Indochina, we've got Madagascar, we've different things all over the place. This little strength bar here does show you the relative strength of various fleets in various waters, and you can see, for example, over here in Northern Europe, we are not really the strongest. Germany has a very strong fleet over here. Britain has a very strong fleet over here. Austria has an extremely strong fleet in the Mediterranean, as does Italy. And of course, the Americans have a strong fleet on their west coast. But even aside from that, many nations have... Oh, Japan, of course, in Japan. But yeah, many nations also have some foreign presence in apart from their home waters, and that is something that you want to keep an eye on. You can also see the invasion ranges. Once you click on this, this gives you information about how far you, based on your technology, you could invade during war. So you could click on here, set let's say Malta, Valletta as an invasion target if we were at war against Great Britain, which of course we aren't, and then we could invade over here, but for example we could not be invading Alexandria because that is simply not within our range. You can also see the current world oil production, the nations that are producing oil. This has something to do with the design choice of your fuel type. If you don't have oil and you are building you are building ships based on oil, you might want to rethink that. Right, Other than that, the map overview should be fine. So let's click on the end turn button over here. Not much is happening. You can only see that the Indian Ocean guy here that was traveling from Southeast Asia has come into the Indian Ocean, and his ultimate goal is still the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, but he will be traveling into the Mediterranean next. But I do want to get a choice. There's a research breakthrough. This is just for your information. You can get intelligence reports. For example, USA is rumored to have increased naval expenditures, and there are some unexplained delays, so that happens. That's just a random thing. So Magenta over here is going to take longer than its sister Friedland. It's not actually a sister ship. These are different designs, which is interesting enough. New research area, so you would have the new area of fleet tactics over here. Again, not something that influences the design of ships so much as they use. So I think for now we could keep that, for example, as low. Some more intel reports, and I would really like to get some intel reports on German ships. So because we do spend some things on German, this is something that they are currently building, and we do get a lot of information on that. And this can be extremely useful, especially once you have more armor information, because you can build a ship to counter them, have more guns, or have guns that specifically are able to penetrate these guys. So do keep that in mind. Every now and then you will get an event, and here we are. This is the first one. An event does give you there's a bit of flavor text. Sometimes it doesn't really make sense historically, but you can see that there are different options, and once you hover over them, you can see the effects. So, for example, the first one over here would increase our budget, it would increase our prestige, and it would increase tensions by a lot. This one down here would decrease prestige and tensions. So depending on your strengths, depending on the situation that you are finding yourself in, whether you want a war, whether you want to prevent a war, you might want to pick over here, but generally prestige is what you should be after. So for example, we could do this, and you can see the tensions over here with Austria-Hungary, the UK and Italy increased. So whether or not that is too harsh, we could certainly not stand up against all of these nations, so that is something that you want to consider. You can also revisit all of these things over here on the intel reports, and again, of course, on the almanac. So that should be very helpful for you. To be honest, the other tabs over here are somewhat of low importance. You can build coastal fortifications. You can build them over here. Let's say you want to build a 12-inch coastal battery in Tunisia, then you could certainly do that. It shows the build time, the costs, and the monthly maintenance cost. Don't overdo this. They typically don't come into play very decisively, so that is something that generally you don't want to overdo. However, you might want to have a look at this, so at the base overview, where you have a list of all of the bases. Air capacity for now and airships is certainly not something of importance in 1900, but you can also go ahead over here and say in Madagascar, improve the naval bases, and that would cost you 1.2 million to improve naval bases, and you will have a higher capability to stay, let's say, in southern Africa. For now, we only can base a certain amount of forces there, as you can see over here. And if we do look at the area overview, you can see that the strength we currently have in Northern Europe, for example, is way lower than base capacity, and that's fine. As soon as you start exceeding this, however, you might get into trouble, and your ships are going to start to see some problems unless they are properly maintained. And then you want to get them out of there as fast as possible. And again, keep in mind that when you design ships, you can set up their engine priority to be reliable, so that they are very independent from your bases, or speedy, which means they are a little bit less weighty, so they are more optimized for speed, but they are also a little bit more flimsy and can break down a little bit more easily, even if the enemy isn't there. Right, that about concludes our little overview here into the campaign map. Do have a look at the design ship video if you want, and of course next time we are going to look at the tactical battles. For now, thank you very much for watching. Do leave a like and all of that if you want, and I'm looking forward to see you guys next time. Bye bye.